It started as just another hearing on Capitol Hill. Lawmakers were seated, papers shuffled across desks, and cameras scanned the room, waiting for something to happen. On the surface, it looked like any other tense day in Congress, but beneath the surface, you could almost feel it. A storm was building. The atmosphere was sharp, like the air before lightning strikes. Every exchange carried extra weight, every glance hinted at something more. It was one of those days where people weren't just debating, they were circling each other like opponents in a ring, waiting for the perfect moment to land a blow. And then it happened. Matt Gaetz leaned forward, his expression cold, his voice cutting through the chatter like a blade. He locked eyes with Representative Jasmine Crockett, and in one calculated strike he unleashed a word designed not just to sting, but to wound. Un-American. The sound of it echoed across the chamber. The chatter stopped. The air grew heavy. Lawmakers shifted in their seats. Even the cameras seemed to draw in closer, as if the entire room froze around that one word, un-American. It wasn't a casual insult. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was deliberate, sharpened, aimed like an arrow at Jasmine Crockett. Now let's pause for a moment here, because to truly understand why this moment was so explosive, you have to know what that word carries with it. When someone is called un-American, it isn't just questioning their opinion. It isn't just disagreeing with them. It's questioning their loyalty, their character, their right to stand tall in the very country they call home. It's a word that tries to strip away dignity, belonging, and identity, all in a single breath. And Gaetz knew that. He knew the cameras were rolling. He knew the crowd was watching. And by choosing that word, he wasn't just trying to shut down Jasmine Crockett in that moment. He was trying to brand her, to mark her as someone who didn't deserve to be in the room, didn't deserve her platform, didn't deserve to be seen as an equal. That's why the silence after was so loud. Because when a word like that lands, people don't just hear it, they feel it, they weigh it. They ask themselves, was that fair? Was that right? Or did he just cross the line? And in that chamber, eyes turned toward Jasmine Crockett. How would she respond? Would she lash out in anger? Would she stumble? Would she let the weight of that word crush her? That's exactly what Gaetz was counting on. He wanted her rattled. He wanted her shaken. He wanted to prove his point by pushing her off balance, but here's the twist. He underestimated her, because Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to play into his hands. She wasn't about to let that word define her. Instead, what happened next would completely flip the script. And that's the part Gaetz never saw coming. He thought he had delivered the knockout punch. He thought he had the advantage. But what he had actually done was set the stage for his own undoing. That single word, meant to silence Jasmine Crockett, was about to become the spark that lit the room on fire. And instead of branding her un-American, it would end up leaving a mark on him. Because in politics, words can be weapons. But sometimes they boomerang back harder than you ever imagined. And in this case, Gaetz had just loaded the slingshot himself. That one word, un-American, didn't just hang in the air. It burned. Because here's the truth. In America, words like that carry history. They carry weight. They carry scars. When Matt Gaetz threw it at Jasmine Crockett, it wasn't just a jab at her personally. It was bigger, much bigger. Let's break this down. What does it actually mean to be American? Is it about who shouts the loudest?
Who waves the flag the highest?
Or is it something deeper, something rooted in the very promise of the country? The answer isn't found in one person's opinion. It's written into the heart of the nation itself. Being American is supposed to mean standing up for your rights, questioning leaders when they go too far, and protecting freedom not just for yourself, but for everyone. And that's why Gaetz's words landed with so much force. Because by calling Jasmine un-American, he wasn't just disagreeing with her ideas. He was trying to rip away her identity, her belonging, her place in the country she represents. Think about how powerful that is. Imagine someone looking at you and saying, "You don't belong here. You don't count. You're not one of us." That's not just an insult. That's a scar. And here's where it gets even heavier. First, throughout history, this same word has been used to silence voices that challenged the status quo. Leaders have used it as a weapon against people who demanded change. It's been thrown at civil rights leaders, war protesters, women who demanded equality, even veterans who dared to question the government they served. Time and again, people who spoke up for fairness were branded un-American. But here's the twist of history. Those same voices, the ones mocked, shamed and silenced, are often the ones we later remember as heroes. The ones who helped push the nation closer to its ideals. That's what makes Gaetz's attack so dangerous. Because when you label someone un-American just for holding leaders accountable, you're not defending the country. You're shrinking it. You're closing the door on what democracy is supposed to be. And Jasmine Crockett understood that. She knew this wasn't just about her pride or reputation. It was about the principle at stake. So in that chamber, when Gaetz tried to shame her, it wasn't just a fight between two politicians. It was a collision between two ideas of America. One idea says, patriotism means loyalty no matter what, silence when power speaks, obedience above all. The other says patriotism means courage even when it's uncomfortable. It means holding leaders to account. It means protecting freedom not just for the powerful but for the powerless. That's why the moment mattered. That's why the word stung. Because when Gaetz used un-American as a weapon, he wasn't only attacking Jasmine. He was attacking the very spirit of what being American is supposed to mean. And here's the part he didn't see coming. Was by using that word, he thought he was shrinking Jasmine Crockett, cornering her, leaving her with no way out. But instead, he was handing her the perfect opening. He was giving her the chance to turn the spotlight right back on him. Because patriotism is not something you can hand out, like a stamp of approval. It's not something one politician gets to control. It's not about exclusion, it's about inclusion. And when you forget that, when you try to weaponize it, the echo of history has a way of flipping the script, which is exactly what was about to happen next. The word un-American still floated in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The room was heavy with silence, eyes locked on Jasmine Crockett. Everyone waited. Would she lash out? Would she stumble? Would she let the weight of that label crush her? That's what Matt Gaetz wanted. That's what he was counting on. He thought he had cornered her. He thought she had no way out. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She wasn't shaken. In fact, she was sharper than ever. She leaned forward, calm and steady. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't break. Instead, it cut through the silence with precision. And with her very first words, it was clear. She wasn't going to play Gaetz's game. She didn't take the bait. She didn't let anger control her. Instead, she chose something far more powerful. Clarity. With every sentence, Jasmine reminded the chamber of something that seemed to have been forgotten. That the most American thing anyone can do is hold leaders accountable. That speaking truth, and especially when it's uncomfortable, is not weakness. It's strength. Her words rolled through the room like a tide. She painted a picture of what true patriotism looks like. It isn't blind obedience. It isn't silence in the face of power. It's courage. It's standing up when others try to push you down. It's defending justice even when the cost is high. And then she flipped the script. With her eyes fixed on Gaetz, she turned the spotlight directly onto him. She reminded everyone listening that trying to silence people, trying to shame them into submission, trying to erase their voice, that is what feels truly un-American. The shift in the room was undeniable. The energy changed. The word that Gaetz had hurled like a weapon had boomeranged back, and now it was hanging over him. Because suddenly the question wasn't about Jasmine Crockett's loyalty. It was about his. The lawmakers in that chamber felt it. The cameras captured it. Even those who didn't always agree with Jasmine had to pause, because her response hit something deeper. It wasn't just about defending herself. It was about defending the very principle that no one has the power to decide who belongs and who doesn't. That's the kind of moment that lives on long, after the words are spoken. And here's what made it even more powerful. Jasmine didn't shout. She didn't match Gaetz's heat with fire of her own.
She didn't need to.
Because real strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's steady. Sometimes it's precise. Sometimes it's the calm in the middle of the storm. And that calm was exactly what exposed Gaetz. As the chamber listened, it became clear. His attack had failed. His insult hadn't silenced Jasmine Crockett. Instead, it had given her the perfect stage to prove why she belonged there more than ever. It was a reversal so sharp, so sudden, that Gaetz himself didn't seem to realize what had just happened. He had handed her the microphone thinking she would falter. Instead, she used it to remind everyone what democracy is supposed to look like. By the time she finished, the label of un-American didn't stick to her at all. It hovered awkwardly around the man who had thrown it. And for the people watching, one thing was crystal clear. The real strength in that room belonged to Jasmine Crockett, because she showed that true patriotism doesn't come from silencing voices. It comes from refusing to be silenced. And with that, the hearing was no longer about Gaetz versus Crockett. It was about something much larger. It was about the meaning of America itself. The clash between Matt Gaetz and Jasmine Crockett could have ended right there. One insult, one comeback, and silence. But it didn't. Because moments like these don't just vanish. They linger. They raise questions that go far beyond two people in a room. And the biggest question of all was this: what does it really mean to be an American? See, patriotism has always been tricky to define. Some people think it means waving the flag as high as possible, singing the anthem the loudest, or never questioning leaders once they're in power. But history tells a different story. Let's take a step back. Pause. When civil rights leaders marched in the streets demanding equality, they were called un-American. When ordinary people protested wars they believed were unjust, they were branded un-American. Even those who worked to expand voting rights in the very heart of democracy were told the same. Over and over, the people pushing the country forward were given that same label. They were told they didn't belong, that their voices didn't matter. But here's the twist. History didn't side with the ones throwing the insults. History sided with the ones who had the courage to stand up. And that's the lesson Jasmine Crockett highlighted with her response. She showed that patriotism isn't about silence. It isn't about agreeing just to keep the peace. Real patriotism means asking hard questions even when it's uncomfortable. It means protecting freedom even when it's risky. And most of all, it means refusing to let anyone decide who counts and who doesn't. Think about it like this. Pause. What's more American? Blindly following whatever the powerful say, or demanding that the powerful answer to the people? What's more patriotic? Silencing voices you don't like, or defending their right to speak? The answer is obvious, and that's why Gaetz's attack fell apart so quickly. By calling Jasmine un-American, he wasn't exposing her weakness. He was exposing his own misunderstanding of what the country is supposed to stand for. Because if patriotism is reduced to a weapon, if it's just a word to throw at anyone who disagrees, then it loses its meaning. And the very ideals it's supposed to protect begin to fade. That's why this moment struck such a chord. It reminded everyone watching that America isn't about exclusion. It isn't about telling people they don't belong. It's about bringing more people in. Expanding the circle, strengthening the foundation by making room for every voice. And here's where Jasmine's response carried even more weight. She wasn't just defending herself. She was speaking to something bigger. She was defending the principle that democracy doesn't work unless everyone has a seat at the table, even those who challenge the powerful. That's the bigger lesson. In a single exchange, she revealed something many forget. Patriotism is not about protecting the comfort of leaders. It's about protecting the freedom of the people. And that's why Gaetz's attempt to brand her as un-American collapsed so quickly. It was trying to use the word as a weapon, but Jasmine showed it for what it really was. An empty threat that couldn't stand up against truth. The room may have been filled with lawmakers that day, but the impact went far beyond Congress. It reached everyone who's ever been told they don't belong, everyone who's ever had their loyalty questioned just because they spoke up. For them, Jasmine Crockett's calm, steady voice wasn't just a comeback. It was a reminder that patriotism belongs to all of us, and no single word, no single insult can ever take that away. When Matt Gaetz launched that word, un-American, he thought he had struck gold. He thought he had landed the kind of insult that would echo through the chamber, leaving Jasmine Crockett cornered and defensive. But instead, something very different happened. Like a boomerang, the word came back. And this time it didn't hit Jasmine. It hit him. Because once her response echoed through the room, the entire tone shifted. Gaetz's insult meant to weaken her ended up shining a spotlight on him. Suddenly, people weren't asking if Jasmine Crockett was un-American. They were asking why Gaetz was so desperate to silence her in the first place, and that question changes everything. It exposed a truth many try to hide, that using patriotism as a weapon doesn't strengthen your argument. It weakens it. Because the moment you try to shut someone down with a label instead of reason, you reveal something about yourself, that maybe, just maybe, your position isn't as strong as you want people to believe. That's exactly what played out in that chamber. Gaetz wanted to define patriotism on his own terms. But Jasmine Crockett showed that no single person has that power. The more he tried to frame her as the outsider, the clearer it became that he was the one standing on shaky ground. And the backfire didn't stop there. For people watching, the moment carried weight. Some saw a reflection of their own experiences, being told they don't belong, being made to feel like their voice doesn't count. To them, Jasmine's calm and powerful response wasn't just about politics. It was personal. It was validation. Others saw the deeper contradiction in Gaetz's attack. Because what could be more un-American than trying to silence a representative elected by the people? What could be more against the spirit of democracy than telling someone they have no place in the very system they were chosen to serve in? That's the irony that turned his insult into a backfire. And here's the real kicker. Once the insult failed, it didn't just fade away. It flipped into evidence. Evidence that Gaetz underestimated his opponent. Evidence that he misunderstood the weight of his own words. Evidence that he gave Jasmine Crockett a platform to show her strength in the clearest way possible. By the time the moment passed, the scoreboard was obvious. Gaetz had tried to brand her as un-American, but he ended up branding himself as the one out of touch with what America is really supposed to be. And the chamber knew it. The audience knew it. Even Gaetz, though he wouldn't admit it, must have felt the sting of his own words coming back to haunt him. Because that's how backfires work. They don't just undo the attack. They leave a scar on the one who launched it. Jasmine Crockett walked out of that chamber not weaker, not smaller, but stronger. She didn't just defend herself. She redefined the moment. She turned an insult into a statement. She transformed an attack into a lesson. And Gaetz, he was left standing in the shadow of his own mistake. In the end, the real story wasn't about a single word. It wasn't even about a single clash. It was about what happens when someone tries to shrink the meaning of America to fit their own agenda, and how easily that attempt can collapse in front of everyone. Because here's the truth. Patriotism is too big to be controlled by one person. It's too strong to be bent into a weapon, and anyone who tries will always run into the same problem. It doesn't silence the voices they target. It only makes those voices louder. And that's exactly why Matt Gaetz's attack backfired so completely.